I'm not gonna lie. When I first accepted this case, I thought I had lost my damn mind. The name's Bernadette Devereux, or Detective Devereux, now that I'm officially with the station. It's crazy just saying that. You see, ever since I was in middle school, I've known this is what I wanted to do with my life. I'm not really sure how to word it without sounding stupid, but the main driving factor for this desire was morality. Before you roll your eyes too hard, let me explain. I can remember all the way back to when I was a little kid that I had a clear as crystal sense of what was right and what was wrong. And boy, was I passionate about it. I still am. That's actually part of why I wasn't sure whether I'd really be cut out for working with the police. I've heard of things going down that alert every fiber to my being about being totally and completely wrong. Evil, even. And I questioned whether or not I'd be able to handle it. But ultimately, I decided to follow this path because I could use the authority to try and bring more good into my city. I wanted to solve crimes, to catch bad people. At least, that was the plan. But apparently, it's going to be a while before I can make any more difference than sorting through old cases and generally being kept busy. As a fresh graduate into the ranks, I get that this is the norm, but God was I eager to really get started. And because of this childish impatience, I stepped into something way over my head. Discontent scanning and digitizing the 100th old case file, I was feeling particularly ballsy and decided to see if I could cheat the system a bit. The other detectives had just returned from some sort of important meeting and looked rather pleased with themselves, so I figured it would be a good time to test my luck. Our department had a pretty damn good case record. I knew this from excessive research while still in the academy. Only a handful of cases in the modern years had ever evaded them. It was one in particular, though, that really caught my eye back then. I remember it well. I was only in my first year of the academy when it was still fresh in the news. The infamous case of the disgraced Dr. Evander Locklear. The breakout was hot news for months. The local station made a big show of their confidence in catching him, but days turned into weeks without strong leads, and eventually those weeks became months, until the case went fully cold. I was outraged at the end of my freshman year when I heard that the case had officially been abandoned. I couldn't understand it. Such an evil man responsible for so much death, and yet they just dropped it without a second thought. That was the first time I ever argued with a professor. When I brought up my disgust, he insisted that it was the correct decision. That since Locklear's escape, there were no spikes in any murders or local disasters. To quote the famous line, "He vanished like a fart in the wind." I didn't see this as strong enough reasoning to abandon the case, though. The initial investigation went way too quickly. It seemed more like they were concerned with covering their own asses and reputations than actually focusing on solving the case. Though I wasn't surprised, seeing as it was a big election year. However, I was certain that if they just picked it up again and looked it over more thoroughly, they were bound to find something. Now that I'm in the force, though, I understand all the layers to the problem. Despite his egregious crimes, this Locklear had built some kind of a cult following in the city. While he was a vicious murderer, he also saved the lives of many children who could have not otherwise afforded it, as sort of a day job. And because of this, some people saw him as morally gray, arguing that the amount of good he put into the world balanced out the bad he did. I fully disagree with this notion. Killing is wrong, and no matter how you try to justify it, that fact remains carved in stone. But I digress. With the small movement of people in support of Dr. Locklear's actions, it became a politically ugly case. To take it head-on would likely endanger the political career of whoever was in charge, and with the political landscape still being the same, I'm afraid they're eager to slide this case out of everyone's memory. Locklear's long gone by now, so that makes it someone else's nightmare, right? So that's what brings me back to my current dilemma. In a moment of impassionment, I swallowed the knot in my throat and charged up to Senior Detective Callaway.
Ah, Devereaux, did you finish organizing those files for me?
He said with an air of amusement. Yes, sir, I breathed, hesitating a moment before getting to my real point. Sir, I've been thinking. Lately, you've had me doing nothing more than office work, and I think I'd honestly have a lot more to offer if I was working on cases. Callaway chuckled and raised a brow.
I appreciate the eagerness, but you gotta work your way up to that, kid. Everyone's done it. It's just part of the system here. You'll get there in time, though.
But what if I could prove my skills? Show you that the department's really missing out on not using me to my full potential, I cried, letting a little more emotion slip in than I would have liked. Callaway frowned for a moment, then he chuckled again, harder this time.
I like your spirit, kiddo. So, just for curiosity's sake, what exactly would you do to show off your skills to deem you worthy of jumping the ranks? Organize the whole office? Track down some lost pets?
Let me reopen the Locklear case, and I'll find him, I spat without thinking. He froze, eyes wide for a moment. Just as I thought I might have crossed some sort of line, Callaway burst into the deepest belly laugh I have ever heard.
Oh, Devereaux, you're a kick,
he said, now wiping away tears.
All right, sure. Tell you what, you finish your filing duties and you're free to open that old case. And if you crack it, consider yourself a main player in the rest of our cases from now on. No more office work.
At this, he continued to laugh heartily, and before walking away, he winked at me and issued a joking order.
Just keep it on the down low. Can't have the press finding out we got an ace detective closing in on the mad doctor.
It was painfully obvious that he didn't take the request seriously, but he had granted me permission, and next time, instead of giving him laughter, I'd plant a look of shock and amazement on his face that he would never forget. Well, that was much easier said than done, I discovered. After several days of poring through the files, which were pitifully done for a case this size, mind you, I had just about given up and accepted my time on office duties. It made no sense. A man with his body count vanishes, but no murder streak followed? With the profile of a murderous psychopath, it just didn't fit. I was beginning to understand why, besides the political element, detectives were eager to just drop it. It was when my patience and willpower were on their last straws that I decided to visit the institution where he had been kept before his escape. If anything, I figured talking to the staff that cared for him would, in the very least, help me maybe understand him a bit more, and maybe lead to a different stream of thought for the case. I headed out bright and early to the sanatorium, hopes high for what I might learn. The building was massive and looming, like a Gothic monolith from a Stephen King novel. From appearances alone, it looked to be impenetrable, so the thought of a single man armed only with a scalpel escaping without a trace seemed nearly unbelievable. Upon walking through the threshold, I spotted a tired-looking woman behind a nurse's station. She was on the phone and only raised her eyes to glance at me a moment before looking back down to a file laying in front of her. After waiting for her to finish her call, she finally acknowledged me.
"Can I help you?"
she asked in a bored voice. I fumbled to pull out my badge. Upon successfully retrieving it, her brow instantly furrowed. "Hello, I'm Detective Devereaux. I was wondering if you might be willing to talk to me about a patient you once treated here. His name was Evander Locklear."
"We've already answered all the questions the police had. It's taken several years to put that whole fiasco behind us, so we'd appreciate if you didn't go digging up bad memories.
The nurse spat, rather bitterly. Miss, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. As far as we're concerned, this information is just between us. Please, I'm just trying to get an understanding on who this man was. Are there any doctors or nurses who treated him that are still working here? I nearly begged. For once, I think my small stature benefited me. Had I looked like a big, burly police stereotype, she probably would have held firm in denying me. But being as I instead looked like a desperate young girl, I think I might have tugged at the last shreds of what remained of her beat-to-hell sympathy. With an exhausted sigh, she massaged her temple and pointed down the hall to an elevator.
Floor 6, office 612. You're looking for Dr. Harrison. He treated that man. I'm telling you, there isn't anything he can tell you that he didn't already tell the police, but you can try. And listen, detective, you gotta make it quick. If you haven't noticed, we've got a hospital to run.
I sprang up, thanking her profusely before dashing to the elevator and impatiently pushing the button. Finally, the old elevator arrived and I climbed in. It was only as the doors were closing that a chilling thought hit me. I could be standing in the very same elevator in which that madman had escaped. Nervously, I drank in the details until the bell dinged and the doors slid open to floor 6. It seemed I was in the clinical part of the hospital, as the halls were empty and sterile with no sign of patient cells. In fact, the only other sign of life was a woman dressed in a janitorial uniform mopping the floor outside of an office. I counted the numbers as I passed the doors, and soon realized that she was standing outside of office 612. As she looked up from her mop, she greeted me with a timid smile. Hi there, I said a bit awkwardly. Is Dr. Harrison in?
Oh yes, ma'am. He should be right in there,
she said warmly as she continued to mop. Thanks, I responded gratefully before reaching out a hand to knock on the door. A gruff voice from within called for me to come in, so I cautiously stepped into what appeared to be some sort of exam room. The doctor was arched over a counter, quickly writing notes about something that appeared to be important. Looking up and not recognizing me, his expression quickly soured.
Can I help you?
He growled. I hope so, I nearly whimpered. I was told you were the physician of Doctor Locklear? Before I could even finish, he slammed his pen down and stood up straight.
How many times do I have to tell you people I had no way of knowing what he would do? Why the hell is this being drug up again? I thought we had finally moved beyond that ugly incident.
He raged. I'm not here to question you. I'm just trying to build a better profile of Locklear. Figure out what he was like, what made him tick. Perhaps you still have some records of him here, I shot back nervously.
I've got nothing else to say than what is already on file. Now, if you kindly leave my office, I have important work to do.
He spat, pointing back to the door. Feeling utterly defeated, I slowly turned and headed back out the door. What the hell was wrong with the medical staff here? They practically acted like they had something to hide. Just as I reached for the elevator button after quickly darting back down the hall, I heard a soft voice call for me.
Excuse me, ma'am.
It was the janitor from before. She looked quite nervous and seemed intent on keeping her voice down while she called me. Yes? I responded weakly.
I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard a bit of your conversation back there. If I had realized what you were going to ask him, I would have warned you. Ever since that Locklear man escaped, Dr. Harrison has been a lot harsher and has a very short fuse with that topic,
she said, averting her eyes.
But I think I might be able to help you.
I instantly perked up at these words.
I'm friends with a woman named Gertrude, who used to be a night nurse here. She quit after that sweet young intern was murdered. I can't blame her. It wasn't her fault, but she feels so much guilt. I could ask her for any information she might have on him if you'd like.
I'd appreciate that so much, I sang. Thank you so much. I made sure to give her my card before happily trotting my way back out of the hospital. It was in my elation that I accidentally pressed the wrong button and got off on the wrong floor. The maze-like hallways within hospitals always confuse me, so it took a moment for me to realize my mistake, and by the time I pressed the elevator button again, it was already gone to another floor. Turning back around, curiosity overtook me while I waited. I slowly walked down the surprisingly eerie hallway, passing door after door. Seeing the tiny wired glass windows embedded, I realized I was in a patient ward. I walked a few more doors down before getting a strange urge to peer through the windows of one of the cells. What met my eyes was an empty, fully padded room. However, I breathed in sharply and took a step back when I noticed a large, rusty stain on the floor. I know very well it could have been the result of any number of accidents, but the stain was so very large, and immediately images of the beautiful young redhead the news had declared murdered via a slashed throat flooded my mind. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the hallway felt dark and heavy. I turned on my heel and broke into a jog as I heard the elevator ding. Like a frightened child, I peered back over my shoulder. For a moment, I could have sworn a dark figure just darted out of view. I did a double take, but of course there was nothing there. But still, my crushing sense of unease didn't fade until I pushed through the front doors once more and made my way to my car. That night was not a good one. I tossed and turned for hours, and when I finally fell asleep, I had nightmares for the first time since high school. Dark, horrible nightmares. I woke up naked and strapped to a dirty operating table. I struggled with the restraints, but they wouldn't give. Suddenly, a large silhouette appeared from the dark like a misty wraith. As the creature stepped forward, I could make out a ragged, hooded cloak and a horrifying patchwork plague doctor's mask. I realized it must be Locklear. He had come for me because I had been digging around where I shouldn't have been. I begged him to spare me, but his only response was a primal, unfeeling laughter. From under his cloak, he pulled out a nightmarish surgical instrument. He brought it lightly down to my flesh. Hot tears began to spill down my cheeks as I realized this is how I was going to die. Before he pierced my quivering skin, he raised his other hand to his face. Slowly, he pulled away his mask to reveal a ghostly visage. A putrid, rotting face with deep black pits instead of eyes, and a lipless mouth full of sharp, scissor-like teeth. Just as he began to tear through my flesh, I sat bolt upright in my bed, panting and wiping away tears from my eyes. It took several minutes before I could even manage to slow my breathing and begin to calm down. Slowly, as I began to come back to my senses, I could hear the soft murmur of the TV I had left on before going to bed. The soft background noise soothed me a bit more. It was some news report. It seemed as though some man accused of murder had just been acquitted due to a screw-up on the arresting officer's part. A bloody travesty. Wait. Suddenly, I found myself even wider awake, my mind buzzing. That's it! That was it! Holy crap, I found the pattern! Criminals who escaped the law. My thoughts were rushing faster than I could keep up. The reason this case file was going nowhere was because his profile had no listed pattern of killing. There had been suspicions of him targeting unsavory sorts, but he also killed that young intern at the hospital, and as far as all records were concerned, she was practically a saint. But what if? What if she was an exception? If she was his night nurse, she was standing between him and his freedom. He may have seen it as being the only option, and if that was the case, all his other confirmed kills were criminals, or I should say, alleged. All had been either unsuccessfully accused or acquitted from extremely heinous crimes. Could it be that Locklear was hunting bad guys? Wait. There was no way no one had pieced this together before me. So why wasn't this in the report? Is our political system really so corrupt as to hinder an open investigation of a serial killer to save face for running politicians? I shuddered, knowing full well the answer to that question. But still, this was a serious break in the case. Callaway gave me the go-ahead to pursue this, so if I were to go to him with this information, he'd have to acknowledge it. Perhaps we could throw together a full team and hunt down this piece of trash once and for all. Having entirely forgotten my nightmare from before, I drifted back to an extremely calm and peaceful slumber for the rest of the night. I was so relieved and elated for the day to follow. I didn't sleep for long, however, as within only a few short hours the sun began to rise. I could have slept for another hour or two, being as my shift didn't start until quite a bit later, but my eagerness pulled me out of bed. I realized that my hunch alone was simply a hunch until I had some facts or evidence to back it up. Despite being a clear breakthrough, I wanted my case to Callaway to be as strong and airtight as possible. Because of this, I decided to head into the department early. I'd dig through the records from the time of Locklear's escape until present day before my shift started. My hope was to find what I needed to get on the fast track to officially joining the investigation team. I poured myself some coffee to go and made the short drive to work. As I walked through the front doors a full 2 hours before my shift, the receptionist looked far too sleepy to even bat an eye. I gave a friendly wave before darting down the hall to my cubicle. I shook my mouse until my computer woke up, then dove into work. There were so many cases. It seemed as though there would be no way I'd find what I needed before Callaway came back into the office. Thinking hard, I decided to change my search up a bit. Instead of searching in crimes, I decided to only look into acquittals. This would have been just as unhelpful if I didn't recognize many of the names. The ones who had particularly ugly and violent cases, but still managed to escape conviction. Making a list of a good number of the names, I exited the records and began to do individual searches on the names. I had only gotten through the first 6 by the time my shift officially began, but I figured it would be more than enough. After all, what I had discovered more than backed up my hunch. Over the course of looking into these individuals, there seemed to be a disturbing pattern. Ranging anywhere from a day to 2 weeks after their acquittal, they just seemed to up and disappear. 1 or 2 doing this might not spark suspicion, being as the court of public opinion could make it hard for them to live under their current identity. But 6? I was willing to bet that if I kept looking into more names, I'd find more vanishings. It was at this point that I heard Callaway's booming laughter as he entered the building. Still incredibly nervous, I gathered my nerve and ran to greet him. "Good morning, sir," I called out as I entered the lobby.
Morning, Devereaux. You're here early.
Callaway chuckled. "Yes, about that. I actually wanted to discuss something with you. You know, that case we discussed last week," I said, eyes full of excitement.
Case?
He responded, a chuckle still in his voice.
What case is that?
"Remember, sir? You said I could look into the Locklear file," I said with determination.
The Locklear? Wait! Don't tell me you're still on about that. I didn't think you'd hold on to it this long. Come on now. There's more important work to be done than play around with an old cold case.
Callaway finished with a tone of dismissal. "But sir, it may not actually be all that cold," I cut in. "I've figured out his MO, and I've even found what could be his hunting pattern. Sir, I don't think he ever left the city. I think he's still here, and I think we can catch him." For a moment, the color in Callaway's face drained. He looked around before leaning closer to me, an extremely stern expression plastered on his face.
I'll only let you chase that fantasy because I had expected you to see how bare the case file was and give up on it.
His voice dropped to just above a whisper as he continued.
Now that you're on the force, you should understand that sometimes there are too many moving parts involved in certain things. Too many important people with things at stake involved. Do you really think you found something that a fully trained investigation team hasn't already? Do you think that's by accident? Listen, kid, you've got a bright future here. Just drop the Locklear case. This little mission of proving yourself was never meant to step on any important toes. This game needs to end now.
But sir, that's not right. We might actually be able to catch him. Are you really just going to let him keep prowling as he pleases just because some ambitious politician doesn't want to deal with the publicity? I shot back, starting to get upset.
That's enough, detective. You're dropping the case. That is an order.
Callaway ordered with a calm severity before turning on his heel and continuing through the lobby. I was devastated. I had always known there was a certain level of corruption in the force, but I had always thought Callaway was one of the true stand-up men that were above it. This is what I had been worried about when considering this pathway. This was wrong. This whole thing was so wrong. Getting through the rest of my shift was incredibly difficult. Immediately after our talk, Callaway jumped back into his usual cheery demeanor and acted as though nothing had happened. I couldn't get to my car fast enough when the clock struck 6. The whole ordeal left me feeling sick, and I didn't know what I should do. It was as I was contemplating options that my phone began ringing. Snapping back from my thoughts, I answered the call. At first, I thought it might have been a wrong number, as there was silence for a moment. But then, a soft voice began to speak.
Hello? Is this Detective Devereux? This is Pam Sinclair. We spoke the other day. I was the janitor outside of Dr. Harrison's office. I had the chance to speak with my friend about that case you're looking into.
She finished, rather timidly. Suddenly, snapping to attention, I answered eagerly. Hello there. You've got the right number. Please, tell me what you've learned.
As I expected, Gertrude was a little sore on the subject. But she said she'd recall what she could if she had the chance of sparing someone else of her sweet little intern's fate.
Pam said softly.
She actually spent a good deal of time around him. She was the night nurse in charge of his wing. He was a very strange man. Not the kind of strange you'd expect from someone institutionalized in a place like that, mind you. Despite being held there against his will, he always had a way of making the staff feel as though he were the one in control. It was only when he was highly sedated that anyone truly felt they were safe around him, because when he was in full control of his senses, he was an incredible manipulator and mastermind.
I sat in silence, absorbing her words with anticipation.
Everyone knew of the things he had done, what he was capable of, but you wouldn't have ever guessed it if you were on his good side. Though the staff members, who often treated the patients poorly, received a lot of frightening aggression from him. All those who were at least moderately respectful found him to be a strangely civilized gentleman. She was rather ashamed to tell me this, but before the night of the incident, he was actually one of her favorite patients. He had this strange way of making you forget what he was, and that made him dangerous.
So many thoughts rushed through my mind, but there was still more to be said.
Before our conversation was over, she told me one last thing that might help you.
Pam hesitantly started. Really? I shot back eagerly.
She said that she heard it from another friend, a nurse from a different hospital. I'm sorry, but she didn't want me to give any names.
That's all right. Go on ahead anyways, I urged gently.
Apparently, the topic is a big taboo over at her friend's hospital. That's because the hospital is the location where Locklear worked when he was still a practicing surgeon. He was actually their top surgeon while he was there. The whole thing was a publicity nightmare for them. It almost destroyed their reputation entirely, despite him not even working there when the crimes happened. The year before the murder started, he resigned and started his own private practice. They couldn't have known what he was really doing.
So he just quit a successful career to be a serial killer? I murmured, furrowing my brow.
Not quite. You see, he only resigned after the terrible incident with his wife. She was pretty far along in her pregnancy. One night, Dr. Locklear was performing an intense surgery on a man who had been shot. He had no access to his phone, and he couldn't be interrupted for fear of the man dying in the extremely delicate procedure. And because of this, he wasn't able to be alerted that his wife had gone into premature labor and had suffered from some severe complications. The doctor who treated her tried his best, but ultimately, neither she nor the baby survived the complications. So, when Dr. Locklear finally completed his surgery and exited the operating room, he had to be informed that just like that, he had lost everything. He quit shortly after, and the rest is history, sadly.
Pam finished quietly. I was a bit in shock after hearing this information. Suddenly, everything was starting to make sense, and his motives were becoming more clear to me. I nearly whispered a shaky thank you to Pam for her help, and when the call ended, I was left with an even more tangled web of thoughts than before. I had a decision to make. I could use this new information to track him down myself, even if no one else on the team would help me. Or I could do as Callaway said and bury it, keeping this information to myself and ensuring my future with the department. The better option for myself and my career was obvious, but morally, it was the wrong thing to do. The thought burned my stomach like a hot coal. Knowing full well I was being a self-righteous idiot, I swallowed hard and resolved that I wasn't going to let this go. Finally kicking my car into gear, I pulled out of the lot and started making my way back home. Not wanting to sit in silence anymore, I switched on the radio. I had left it on some talk show, and they seemed to be heatedly discussing some recent news. One man was loudly yelling about people needing to accept the rulings of our legal system, while another was shouting back about clear guilt going unpunished. Thoroughly worn out from the long day I had just gone through, I reached to change the station to something more pleasant. However, my hand froze as the memory of the news story playing softly on the TV flashed back into my mind. That's right! A man accused of murdering his pregnant wife had just been acquitted due to an error, despite clearly appearing to be guilty. Not only did this perfectly fit the criteria for one of Locklear's victims, but due to the nature of this crime and what I had just learned about him, this was a target I don't think he'd possibly be able to pass up. If I played my cards right, I'd have him. So I made my plan. I decided the best way to catch Locklear was to keep an eye on his prey and catch him before he could get away. It was fortunate that the weekend was coming up because I could dedicate my time to tailing him, given Locklear usually struck within a week of acquittals, so I was in the middle of a delicate window of opportunity. I'd have to work quickly and bend a few rules, but ultimately, I believed that what I was doing was the right thing, so it was worth it.